The first time I saw the text, I was stirring a pot of his favorite spaghetti. The phone buzzed on the counter, a familiar name lighting up the screen. I didn't mean to read it. My hands were wet, my focus on the simmering sauce, but my eyes snagged on the preview. I can't stop thinking about your laugh from last night, the way your eyes crinkled. First thought was logistical. Who has a laugh that makes their eyes crinkle in a way that warrants a text at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday? My second thought was, is he texting his mother about a new comedy special? My third thought was the one that settled in my stomach like a stone. I knew that laugh, I knew that text. I'd been with Mark for 19 years. We built a life from the dust of our early 20s, through the heady days of first jobs, the exhaustion of new parenthood, the quiet triumphs and minor tragedies that stitched two people together. Our life was a patchwork quilt, worn soft and familiar in all the right places. We had a rhythm, a comfortable, reliable beat. He was the steady pulse to my erratic heartbeat. He balanced my chaos with his calm. He was my other half, but that text was a fracture, a hairline crack in the bedrock of our entire existence. I put down the wooden spoon, wiped my hands on my jeans, and picked up his phone. There was a part of me that knew I shouldn't. A part that screamed, this is a violation of trust, this is wrong. But a larger, more primal part of me, the part that had been feeling his gaze slide off me for months, the part that noticed his sudden obsession with the gym and new, tighter-fitting shirts, the part that felt the ghost of a distance growing in our bed, that part needed to know. I scrolled. The name at the top was Kelly W. My thumb hovered over the conversation. I opened it. It was a novel. A sordid, cliched, heartbreaking novel. It was a chronicle of their affair. It had started innocently enough, I could see. Great presentation today. Loved your insight on the Henderson account. Are you free for a coffee to discuss the Q3 projections? Coffee, then drinks, then a hotel downtown. My heart stuttered, a painful, a rhythmic beat as I read the digital evidence of his betrayal. The messages painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize. A man who spoke in flowery, poetic phrases he'd never used with me. A man who was giddy and reckless, who texted, "I miss you," just hours after he'd kissed me goodbye and told me to have a good day. He called her his inspiration, his breath of fresh air. I read a message from him saying, "It's different with you. It's like I'm alive again." Alive. I felt a bitter laugh bubble in my throat. I was the one who had been his life support for 2 decades. I was the one who held his hand when his father died. I was the one who nursed him through the flu, who celebrated his promotions, who quietly held down the fort so he could build his career. I was the rock upon which he stood to build his new life, and now he was discarding me for a woman who apparently made his eyes crinkle. I didn't confront him immediately. I spent a week in silent agony. I went through the motions. I poured his coffee. I asked about his day. I let him kiss my cheek. I watched him, analyzing every gesture, every distant gaze. I felt like a forensic scientist examining the crime scene of my own life. I was waiting for what I didn't know, a confession, a change of heart, a sign that it was all a terrible mistake. The sign came on a Friday evening. He came home, his energy different. It was electric, buzzing with a nervous excitement I hadn't seen in years. He sat me down on the sofa, the same one we'd picked out together, the one with the faded cushion from where our son, Leo, used to sit and watch cartoons. He took my hands. His were clammy. "Claire, we need to talk." He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at our intertwined hands. I haven't been happy for a long time. I just stared at him. The phrase was so hollow, so utterly meaningless. It was the coward's preface to every emotional sucker punch. "What are you talking about, Mark?" My voice was surprisingly steady. It was the voice of a woman who had already cried all her tears in the shower, in the car, in the dead of night while he slept soundly beside her. "I've met someone." He said it like it was a confession of a secret passion, not an act of profound cruelty. "Her name is Kelly, and I feel things for her that I haven't felt in a very long time. She makes me feel young, she makes me feel seen." Seen, the word was a knife. For 19 years I had not just seen him, I had absorbed him. I had made his joy my joy, his pain my pain. I had seen him at his worst, holding his head over a toilet, and at his best, beaming as he held his newborn son. And he dared to say this stranger, this woman who saw him only in curated glimpses, saw him. "So what does that mean?" I asked, my fingers going numb in his grip. He finally looked at me. There was a flicker of guilt in his eyes, quickly extinguished by a desperate resolve. "I'm leaving Claire, I'm in love with her, I'm moving out, I want a divorce." There it was, the bomb had detonated. The life I had known, the future I had imagined, lay in smoking ruins around me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just pulled my hands from his and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street where we'd walked our son to the school bus for years. The street that represented stability, normalcy, home. Is it because she's younger? I asked, my back to him. I didn't need to ask, I knew. I'd seen her picture on his phone. She was 26, fresh-faced, with the kind of dewy skin you only have before life has had a chance to leave its mark. She was a junior associate at his firm, a muse, an escape. "It's not about age," he said, his voice filled with the righteous indignation of a man who knows he's doing something wrong and is trying to build a moral defense. "It's about connection, it's about passion. You and I were just comfortable. We're roommates, Claire." He was rewriting our history, erasing the passion of our early years, the deep, abiding love that had grown over time, the intimacy that was more profound than any fleeting, selfish fire. He was reducing 19 years to a mundane arrangement. "All right," I said, still staring out the window. It was the hardest word I've ever had to say. It wasn't acceptance, it was surrender. Surrendering to the reality that you cannot fight for a person who has already left. "Get your things," was so eager to start his new life. He took his clothes, his books, his expensive sound system. He left behind the family photos, the kids' artwork that had graced the fridge for years, the books he'd bought me with inscriptions in the front. He was cleansing himself of our history, eager to embrace a clean slate. The divorce was swift, ugly in its efficiency. He was so anxious to be free that he was generous, too generous. He gave me the house, a decent settlement, and barely put up a fight for custody. He wanted to be unshackled. He wanted to be the new Mark, the one who went out for drinks with a beautiful girl, not the father of a sullen teenager and the ex-husband of a woman he'd betrayed. He moved into a sleek, modern apartment downtown, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a concierge. He and Kelly were a fixture on the city scene. I saw them once at a restaurant. They were laughing at something. He had his arm around her. He looked younger. It strung. It strung worse than the divorce itself. It was the visual confirmation that he had traded me in for a newer, shinier model, and he was happier for it. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces. I had to put on a brave face for Leo, who was 14 and took his father's departure as a personal betrayal. His grades slipped. He became quiet and angry. I'd find him staring at his phone, waiting for calls from his father that rarely came. Mark was too busy being seen to see his own son, and through it all, I had to deal with the practical realities. It took me a week to stop automatically setting a place for him at the table. I had to learn how to unclog the kitchen sink on my own. I had to navigate the terrifying world of budgeting, realizing how much of our financial stability was built on the foundation of us that he had so casually torn down. I felt like a ship that had been cut adrift from its anchor. I was lost in a sea of quiet desperation, but somewhere in the middle of the night, in the heart of my grief, I started to get angry. Not the hot, screaming anger, but a cold, clear, righteous fury. It was a survival mechanism. I looked at my reflection in the dark bathroom mirror. The lines around my eyes were deeper. My hair was streaked with grey. I was 44, I was no longer young, but I was still here, I was still standing, and I would be damned if I was going to let him win, so I did something that scared me. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started planning. I was a trained architect. I'd given up my career to support his, to raise our son, to create the perfect backdrop for his life. But those skills were still there, dormant but not dead. I started sketching again. Late at night when the house was silent, I'd pull out my old drafting tools and I'd design. I designed a community centre for the east side of the city. It was an idea I'd had for years, a place for at-risk youth and families to come together. I poured all my heartache, all my loneliness, all my fury into those sketches. It was an antidote to the small, selfish world Mark had created for himself. It was about building something, not for a person but for a community. It took a year of relentless work. I found a small, struggling non-profit to partner with. I used my settlement money to fund the initial feasibility study. I harassed city council members, presented my designs to anyone who would listen. The process was grueling. It was a constant struggle. There were days I wanted to quit, days when the loneliness was so crushing I could barely breathe. But I kept thinking of that look in his eyes, the one that said, "You are the past," and it fueled my fire. The project finally got the green light. It was a small victory, a single blue star in my inky black sky. I dedicated myself to it. I was on site constantly. My hands were calloused from working alongside the volunteers, my skin tanned from the sun. I was building a new identity, one brick at a time. Just as my new life was beginning to take shape, the universe in its infinite irony began to dismantle his. It started with the whispers. Leo, who was now 15 and begrudgingly spent weekends with his father, would come home with snippets of information. "Dad seems stressed," he'd say, or "Kelly is always on her phone." Then the first major crack appeared. Mark had been a partner at a prestigious firm. He was a rainmaker, a smooth talker who brought in big clients. But in the cutthroat world of corporate finance, reputation is everything. His affair, which he had flaunted so brazenly with his divorce, started to be seen as a liability. A man who would so casually discard his family was not a man to be trusted. Kelly, it turned out, was not just a muse, she was also a liability. She had a habit of talking too much at firm parties, of sharing details that should have stayed private. I heard through the grapevine that he was passed over for a major promotion. He was 47, a dangerous age in his industry. He was no longer the hungry upstart, he was the expensive, distracted veteran. The younger partners were circling, hungry for his clients, ready to exploit his vulnerabilities. He tried to keep up his energetic, charming persona, but the veneer was starting to crack. Then came the real blow. The firm he worked for was acquired by a larger, more ruthless conglomerate. The new management was tasked with streamlining. They took one look at the partners' portfolios and saw Mark as a high-cost, high-risk asset. A middle-aged man with a messy divorce, a young, expensive girlfriend, and a reputation for being a little too flashy with the company credit card was not a safe bet. He was let go. With a generous but finite severance package, I heard he tried to start his own consulting firm. He tried to use the contacts he'd made, but people were reluctant. The trust was gone. He was seen as the guy who'd had a midlife crisis and torpedoed his own life. His phone stopped ringing. The clients who had once clamored for his advice were suddenly unavailable, but it was what happened next that truly sealed his fate. Kelly, the breath of fresh air, the inspiration, the woman who made him feel seen. It turned out that Kelly's passion was less for him and more for the life he could provide. The sleek apartment, the expensive dinners, the designer clothes. Without his steady stream of income and his high-flying corporate status, his shine began to dull. I imagine their conversations changed. The giddy, uncomplicated romance gave way to the stark realities of money. Their relationship, built on a foundation of fantasy and excitement, couldn't withstand the pressure of real-world anxieties. They'd fought, I heard, loudly, the kind of fights that echoed through the thin walls of his new, less glamorous apartment. He'd had to move out of the downtown place. The money was running out. He started trying to reconnect with Leo. He would call him more often. He'd try to take him out for dinner, but he couldn't afford the places he used to take him. He'd try to talk to me, to reminisce about the good old days. I would listen, my face a polite, frozen mask, and I would feel nothing. The man on the other end of the phone was a stranger wearing my ex-husband's face. He was the ghost of the man I once loved, reduced to a cautionary tale. One night Leo came home looking devastated. He was almost 17 by then. A man. Really, he said, Mom, Dad is moving. He says he has to sell his apartment. I nodded, waiting. Kelly left him, Mom, he said, his voice flat with a kind of disgusted pity. She found someone else, another guy from his old firm, a younger one. I should have felt a surge of vindication, a gloating sense of I told you so. But all I felt was a profound, bone-deep sadness, not for him but for the waste of it all. The destruction he had wrought, the years he had thrown away for a woman who had seen him as nothing more than a stepping stone. The final chapter of his downfall came with the legal action. The firm he'd been let go from had started an internal audit. They were investigating some of the deals he'd been involved with in his last year there. He'd been desperate to maintain his lifestyle, to keep Kelly happy, to project an aura of success. In his desperation, he'd cut corners. He'd bent the rules. The audit uncovered that he'd been using client funds for personal expenses. He was facing a serious fraud investigation. I learned about it through the local news. There it was in black and white. Former partner at firm name faces embezzlement charges. His photo was next to the headline. It wasn't the confident, dashing man who had left me. It was a haggard, frightened man, with dark circles under his eyes and a deep furrow in his brow. The world he had built in his desperation to escape his life had collapsed upon him. He'd lost his family. He'd lost his career. He'd lost his fortune. He'd lost his dignity. He was facing prison time. I thought I would be happy. I thought the universe would finally have its revenge, and in a way it did, but there was no joy in it. It was a tragedy, a Greek tragedy written by the gods of hubris and poor judgment. He called me one last time. It was a pathetic, drunken call. His voice was slurred and broken. Claire, he'd said, his voice cracking, you were right about everything. Kelly, she just wanted the money, and now I have nothing, was crying. The man who had left me because I was too comfortable was now crying to me, the person he had discarded to be his emotional support. It was the ultimate irony. He had thrown away a woman who would have stood by him through anything, for a woman who left him at the first sign of struggle. Mark, I said, and my voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had survived, the voice of a woman who had built a new life from the ashes of the one he'd burned down. You'll be fine. was a lie. We both knew it. He wouldn't be fine. He had destroyed his life with his own 2 hands, and there was nothing I could do to save him. I didn't offer to help. I didn't offer comfort. I just hung up the phone. The next day I went to the site of the community center. The skeleton of the building was starting to take shape. It was going to be beautiful, a place of hope and redemption. I walked through the construction site, my hard hat on, my heart full. I talked to the foreman about the steel beams. I looked at the plans, my plans, the ones I'd drawn in the lonely, painful nights. This was my legacy, my revenge. It wasn't about watching him fail. It was about proving that I could succeed. It was about discovering that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one I had with myself. I had been so broken that I thought I would never be whole. I was wrong. I was there for the grand opening. It was a magnificent day. The whole neighborhood came out. Children were laughing, families were playing. Leo was there, beaming with pride. He was in college now, studying engineering, and he looked at me like I was his hero. A group of local teenagers had painted a mural on the side of the building. It depicted a phoenix rising from a pile of rubble. I looked at it and felt a chill run down my spine. It was my story. I didn't hear from Mark again for a while. The court case went through. He was given a sentence. The details were in the paper. He would have to register as a felon. His life, as he'd known it, was truly over. I received one final letter from him a few months later. It was written on simple, lined paper. The handwriting was shaky. He was in a halfway house trying to get his life back together. He wrote about his great regret. He talked about how foolish he'd been, how he'd mistaken lust for love and a new beginning for a renewal of his own spirit. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Claire," he wrote. "And I threw it all away for a mirage. I see that now. I was so busy chasing the idea of youth and excitement that I forgot I had a life filled with genuine substance. The love you gave me, the family we built, it was everything. And I was too stupid to see it until it was gone. You deserved so much better than me." Ended the letter with a plea. "I don't expect your forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I know what I lost, and I'm so sorry." I read the letter on the porch of my house. The house that was truly mine now. I looked up at the sky. It was a clear, brilliant blue. I thought about the 19 years of marriage. I thought about the laughter, the quiet evenings, the shared dreams. I remembered the good man he once was. The man who held my hand when I was scared. The man who made me feel safe. That man was gone. He had killed him himself. I didn't cry. I felt a profound, quiet emptiness. It wasn't sadness. It was the final absence of the love I once held for him. He had taken that love and shattered it. He didn't get to have it back now that he was lonely. I got up and walked back inside. I looked at a photo of Leo and me that was on the mantelpiece. We were at the community center. He was holding a giant pair of scissors, cutting the ribbon. We were both